everybody. Thank you very much, Jeff. Round of applause to Jeff, everyone, and the Sydney Psychedelic Society chapter. This is really good having a book launch, because I don't know if anyone here's written a book, but you're trapped in a room thinking that it's shit for about 5 years. And so it's great to finally actually have it validated on some level. So the book is basically I was basically writing blogs all the way through like this spiritual emergence process that I was going through to try and integrate it as it was happening. And then at the end of like the 4-year mark, my friend was like, why don't you turn it into a book? So after 5 years of that, it became a book. So the book is sort of starts off as, I'm a depressed comedian. Comedians in general are pretty fucked up people. You know, it's comedy is kind of like where mental health meets theater. You know, it's like not a healthy profession. You know, you're kind of a self-destructive individual, and then people kind of enable that. You get paid money, lots of free drinks, and then it's just a downward spiral, and then hopefully fame. So, so I was that for about 13 years. I had a lot of demons, and I would say I was pretty much clinically depressed for most of my adult life. And I would say I was I loved drugs. I was into lots of drugs, just not heroin, because I thought it was a gateway drug into born-again Christianity. So I avoided that one, except for those 2 times in India, but that's a separate story. And so essentially what happened is that I found ayahuasca, and I tried that in 2015. I assume everyone here knows what ayahuasca is. Yeah, it's South American shamanic medicine, very powerful. Saved my life. If you guys don't know what it is, on a chemical level, it's an oral form of dimethyltryptamine, which is actually a chemical your brain floods with when you die, and it's also against the law. So when you die, you should just go to jail. Really, that's what should happen, because you've got a little Breaking Bad drug lab in your brain, and you should just rot in jail, not in the cemetery. So I did that, and I had a very powerful experience where I met the guy in intelligence. Now, I understand that I'm not coming from a clinical scientific point of view, so this is probably going to sound like woo-woo psychosis to a lot of people, but you can just laugh at me if you want to, and indulge my delusional belief system, which I actually don't think is delusional at all. So I talked to Gaia. And before that, I would say I was like a scientific materialist nihilist. I really didn't believe in anything. I just thought the whole point to life was to get fucked up, and you know, I was just this meaningless dot on a dead rock, and which is really depressing actually if you think about it. And I basically met Gaia, and she told me to help her, and I was like, what is this fucking avatar or something? Like, I don't really know what I'm in for here. And anyway. And she also gave me a very powerful talking to. She told me that basically the human race, especially in the civilized West, are a bunch of self-centered twats, and we're very self-obsessed, and I needed to get over myself. And she told me to go find my roots and do some charity work in Nepal. So I booked a flight to Nepal, and the day before I was to fly out, the Nepal earthquake happened in 2015, and I thought, oh wow, I was meant to go there to do charity work anyway, to get over my self-centeredness. Maybe this earthquake just happened for me. And so I spent 5 months basically paying off my karmic debt. And then from there, I went to do hospice work in Calcutta. So half the book's actually not about psychedelics. It's actually about like the journey anyway. It's also about my self-doubt, I realized, reading of it for the 5,000th time. But so I went and helped out at this Kolkata hospice, where I basically wiped dying homeless men's asses for about a month. And that was pretty intense. And I had a spontaneous shamanic initiatory call from helping a man die. So there's actually no psychedelics involved. I was just holding this man's hand while he died. I don't know if anyone ever done that before. It's pretty intense hit. And I was doing this sort of Tibetan meditation called Tonglen, where I was trying to take on his energy and convert it into, love and light and all that hippie stuff. And instead what happened is I went into sort of a DMT space just without the visuals, and it was a very activating, like, it was a powerful like experience. I'd never had that before. And then 40 minutes later, I was cremating his body in a crematorium in Kolkata. And then I just had pretty much like a very bizarre experience where, and this is where I think the universe does have a sense of humor, because I had my spiritual awakening while watching Star Wars: The Force Awakens. After helping this man die, I was that scene where Kylo Ren stabs Harrison Ford through the heart with his lightsaber. Basically, my reality collapsed, and I heard these voices in my head say, "You work for us now. Remember what we told you." And then I had this spontaneous reactivation of my ayahuasca experiences up until that point, which were basically giving me all this pretty cooked information, which I feel reticent about sharing with you in public. So read the book, it's all in the book. So then I went down this path of like, of training. I started training I stopped doing comedy because it's very hard to balance comedy with the spiritual crisis. I was going on stage and having an identity crisis on stage, which I thought was funny, but the audience was just worried about my safety. And so I basically spent, the last, like this book actually only goes up to 2018. So there's actually another 4 years after that, which aren't in the book. And even though it's called No More Trippin', I kept tripping for a while. So it's false advertising. But there's a second book, which is all about my work with the Boga, which I've started writing already. And maybe that's called Keep On Trippin', I don't know. But I haven't drunk any ayahuasca for 2 years now, but anyway. So what happened after that was I started training and I started serving ayahuasca. And I guess the book's about like where we're at in the psychedelic scene, because like a lot of people just self-initiating themselves now because there's no real like lore or rites of passage left in our culture. So we're all kind of stuck in this infantilized headspace. We're all sort of emotionally about 8. And so it's a very haphazard process. Like in indigenous cultures, you can pretty much, you have set systems of law that have been worked out over thousands of years. You're doing the plants which grow in your exact area, and you're doing it with your tribe who've all done it before. So it's a holistic, interrelated process. But here, I mean, we're in this time where you can do anything you want all the time. You can fucking do a boga, and next week do toad, and then completely different countries these medicines are from, and then you can throw in meditation, float tanks, breath work, tantra, you name it. And so it's a real experimental phase, and you can really get very far from that. Like I don't think there's greater potential for healing now than any other time, but also you can actually really fuck yourself up. And it's not popularly talked about, but I have met plenty of casualties in the space. I've been one myself for a while, here and there in my process. So I actually don't think there are casualties. There are just people who are stuck at a certain stage in their process and they don't know how to get out. So I think this book actually is kind of like a guide on how not to do it. So, so I ended up serving ayahuasca for about 5 years, ayahuasca in Cambo, in the underground in various Airbnbs around the world. I mean, around Australia, because you have to have a backup option in case the comedy thing doesn't work out. And it was an amazing experience. It was, I probably witnessed around 2,000 experiences, which is not that much compared to some of my other contemporaries, but like I've got friends and teachers who have done like upwards of 10,000 and stuff like that. But it's enough, I feel, for me to get a rough layout of the land. And what I did notice because I was right in the middle of the second boom of the psychedelic renaissance, was that at the beginning I was just treating like mostly spiritual new age, people who kind of knew what it was about, and also like or people who had tried everything else for a specific illness and nothing worked. And then halfway through, it just started turning into everyone, because they were listening about it on a Rogan podcast or reading about it in fucking Woman's Day from a Prince Harry interview. And all of a sudden I was treating like bus drivers and like security guards and psychologists. I gave it to cops. I was giving ayahuasca to cops, which was very surreal. Yeah, they actually told me, hey, can you not tell them that I'm a cop to everyone else in the group? And I was like, of course I'm not going to say that, So actually in the middle of the ceremony, a cop chopper flew over the top, and she ran up to me and she was like, hey, Nick, can you, I'm really worried that the cops might find out that I'm here. and I might lose my job and my career's fucked. And I was like, yeah, okay. So I like, if they find out that I'm giving ayahuasca to a cop, I think I'm much more fucked than you. So just chill out. But you know, she actually quit being a cop afterwards. So I count that as a cure. So that was my career highlight. I actually had her on as a helper afterwards. So I like to say that I employed a cop. But actually, cops aren't good helpers for ayahuasca, because one guy had a very extreme response, and I had to sort of like, he was trying to shadow box me a lot, you know? And afterwards, the cop was like, oh, I really loved how you handled that, Nick. You were so compassionate. I would have just pepper sprayed him. So I was like, no more cops helping the ayahuasca. But she had a really powerful experience. She was like, yeah, you know what? You know, I was trying to help out at a DVA assault case, and I was trying to help this guy who was assaulting his wife, and I suddenly realized that he was just acting from a place of trauma, and he wasn't consciously aware of how he was acting. And I just realized, wow, don't give cops ayahuasca, because you really need someone, you know, to handle that situation. You don't want that level of empathy, you know, you just want to need someone who can sort of, you know, restrain him for a bit, you know. So, you know, it's sort of a, so where am I going with this? Essentially what I found was that I was very evangelical at the beginning of my career. I was just like, throw ayahuasca at everyone and the world will change. And then the honeymoon period kind of ended, and I realized, wow, it's not that easy. Like, what I realized is the system itself is sick, and people are getting sick from the system, because I was getting people coming to me with the standard level of depression and anxiety which comes from living in the matrix. They would get cured for a while, and then they'd come back 2 months later, and I noticed this sort of merry-go-round happening. And I read about terrain theory, which is like how, you know, it's if you have a sick goldfish in a dirty aquarium, and then you make the goldfish well again, and then you stick it back into the dirty aquarium, it's not going to get well, right? So I now view psychedelics not so much as medicines, but as I think best used as tools for social change to somehow create a better system. What that looks like, I don't fucking know, but I guess that's the end point of where I got to with the ayahuasca. And then I got railroaded for the last 2 years between 2021 after COVID happened. I had, like, that book ends with a flood dose, which was like horrific. And I'm like, I swear off psychedelics for the rest of time at the end of the book. I end up doing like 3 more flood doses. So I don't really learn very well. So if you guys know what a boga is like a West African, they call it a remedelic because it actually mimics a waking dream state. And I would say it is like if ayahuasca takes you up into the cosmos, iboga takes you deep into your soul and into the earth. It's like a 36-hour, usually pretty confronting trip. It's used as rites of passage in Africa to take you into the ancestral world where you meet your ancestors and they tell you things. So I met my dead grandfather, and he told me that he was worried about me. I said, well, I'm worried about you, Granddad, because you're in the land of the dead. But it's a very powerful experience. So I ended up serving, co-facilitating iboga for about 2 years with a teacher and also another friend. And that was equally powerful work. But yeah, somewhere around April last year, there was a death in the scene. I don't know if you guys heard about that. And I kind of knew people involved, so that really made me really like the reality of that sort of, because usually you just read a death, it's like a sentence in an article in the Amazon, but this was actually connected to people I directly knew who were dealing with this. And in the middle of the ceremony, I was treating a friend with he was a drummer and he had partial paralysis of his arms. We usually do full medical screenings, but we couldn't get his ECG readings from. Like, I swear there was like some kind of cosmic interference happening. Like the doctors just kept fucking up. They could never get it to him, or it wasn't coming out clear. We tried to give him like ECG readings on our machine, and it just didn't work for him. Everyone else had worked, but for some weird reason, 6 times just didn't give us any results. So we fell into it and we thought, fuck it, I really feel like this guy needs to do this. So we gave it to him anyway, and then halfway through this 36-hour Land of the Dead experience for him, I was staring at him and I wasn't sure if he was breathing, and I freaked out. I went up to him and I shook him like 5 times, and then he was like, whoa, what's going on, Nick? And I just thought, man, I think I just want to do comedy again, you know? So it cured his arm situation though. So it all worked out well. He can drum now. So So I thought, you know what? I think I'm just gonna get this book done and fucking go back to comedy for a while, and try and talk about this shit more. So, essentially, what am I talking about here? So, yeah. So I guess what I think about where psychedelics are now is like I was talking about, where it's a systemic thing. I think it's being co-opted now. I mean, let's be honest. It's not gonna. How can it not get co-opted, right? So it's like, how do we actually navigate this space now? And what I'm worried about is like psychedelics being used as a band-aid, basically just to keep essentially an unsustainable system running. You know, which I feel is kind of happening. Like, no offense to MAPS, are doing great work, but they're using PTSD, MDMA for war veterans, which is very important work, but it doesn't actually solve the idea that that's just going to keep more war happening. You know, they're like, oh great, now we can just keep having more war. So, you know, and it's never going to be 100% safe. You know, we're basically throwing psychic dynamite into a completely fractured Western psyche. So there's going to be collateral. But what we can do is just try and pool our resources and try and educate people who are doing it themselves, because it's happening anyway, and you can't really stop it. So I guess that's where I feel is where we're heading on like the DIY path, which is, I guess, what the book's about. Because, you know, firstly, it's fucking expensive. It's 25 grand to do like MDMA therapy. Like, who the fuck can afford that, right? And do you really want to do it with a psychologist? I don't know. I mean, look, I have done MDMA therapy with a IFS psychologist. It was really amazing. But like, I wouldn't pay 25 grand for it because I just don't have that money, you know? So, and also like, I don't know, I found the real benefits of the self-healing process, although I would say that it's like it's less safe. It is more empowering if you're able to do it yourself, because half the reason why I think a lot of people are sick is they're constantly outsourcing their authority to some high priest of, you know, whatever, the psychiatrist or psychologist. And so I think it's actually, for our culture, which is very infantilized and sort of has a lot of ingrained learned helplessness, I think actually doing it yourself on some degree, unless you have severe trauma or lots of issues, then definitely go see a professional, like, for sure. But I think for the standard level of dysfunction that most of us have from living in this culture, you can do some level of work as long as you're educated enough and you have a good support system. So I think that's where you kind of want to head towards. So yeah, so I guess that also on that subject, I think we're heading towards some kind of meta crisis. I think we have about 5 to 15 years before shit gets pretty like Lord of the Flies. That could just be me, but like, I don't think using psychedelics to try and like adjust to that or adapt to that or try and steer ourselves away from that, you can't really scale that on a clinical model. So I think this is where we're going to have to start like colluding and creating maps on how to best navigate this novel space. So I'm just doing a quick run through of some traps and pitfalls that I've learned from my time in the space. I haven't really written any solutions to this stuff. I do have solutions, but that would just be a separate talk because it would just be too long otherwise. So, and also I'm not judging anyone who's been through these things, because most of these I learned myself from making all these mistakes. Yeah, in the book, I basically go through this massive period of ego inflation, which you'll see if anyone's hung out in enough ayahuasca circles, there's always one dude who thinks they're kind of Jesus or some shit. It's usually the shaman. And that's what happened to me. I had this whole message from ayahuasca that I was the chosen one and I was like the catalyst for change. And so about a year and a half, I carried around like a complete fucking idiot, you know, and you know, it felt great, don't get me wrong. Like I had a sense of mission and I felt very important, but essentially you can get very ungrounded from that experience. And I actually think that's what happens when you're running a lot of medicine through a very self-centered culture, a person who's from that sort of culture. So it's no one's fault. And I feel like from what I've studied of like Eastern systems and like various spiritual and also the shamanic training pathways, in the West, we're pretty much just going straight to the top of the mountain without any preparation. And so what you're getting is a lot of people, like if you study like the other systems, there's a lot of purification, a lot of training of the mind, meditation, a lot of nervous system practices like yoga or qigong to basically train your system to become strong enough to basically hold whatever activation you get. But we're not really doing that here in the West. So we're just sort of just running heaps of fucking medicine through us and then blowing these higher centers without actually grounding ourselves. And that creates a whole bunch of problems, which I had to basically work through myself. And as you can see, I'm fully cured. So join my cult for $49.95. Which brings me to my next thing. Like, there's fucking heaps of cults out there now, like medicine cults. I don't know if anyone's been to medicine. Yeah, this is what happens. Like, you're getting a lot of people. I mean, there's a lot of people kind of lost right now. And so there's a lot of guru shit going on in the scene. So just be aware of that. Like, what happens is you have a very powerful opening experience, and then you project that onto the nearest point of contact, which is usually a facilitator, and then that goes to his head. It happened to me, and then it just turns into this weird vibe. So, I mean, cults are great. I ate at the Yellow Deli in Katoomba the other week, and they make great sandwiches. So, you know, there's good things to that. And also, you can also just, so in general, it can really unbalance your system. The other discipline I had to start studying, basically to keep my system from, to anchor what was happening to me, I ended up having to work with this particular Qigong practitioner called Master Yang, and that was very vital in actually helping me ground a lot of this shit back into my body. Otherwise, you can basically just throw your nervous system out of balance. And you'll see people who are a bit spaced out, a bit ungrounded. They have what I call Vata aggravation. That's an Ayurvedic term, which is basically you're kind of just skitzing out a lot of the time. You're very nervous, you're very anxious, and your system's sort of out of balance. So, which brings me to the next one, which is spiritual bypassing. I mean, I went through a whole phase of this where I just thought I could drink ayahuasca every week for about a year, and then I'd be enlightened. I was enlightened for about 6 hours at a time, but unfortunately it doesn't last very long. And what ended up happening was that, I was just running from my problems. And I guess the book ends with me doing Iboga, which is very hard to bypass on because it goes for 36 hours, so it just wears you down. And some of the medicines you can definitely bypass on easier than the others because, you know, like, I get it, love and light is really nice, but if you ever work as an ayahuasquero, after about fucking 30 sessions of listening to people going on about that stuff, it really gets tiring. Like, it's not the whole picture. It's actually what happens is people get obsessed with the love and light shit, and then they can just use it to push down all their trauma and actually all the fucked up shit that they actually need to work through to help bring the love and light permanently into their system. So, yeah, I know we're all one, but just, you know, keep it down a little bit sometimes. So, you know, trust me, if you go enough, you hear the same thing said over and over again. So, and that can basically lead to dependency. I wouldn't say you can get addicted to psychedelics, but you can definitely become dependent on them to some level. And you can become over-reliant on them, and that can actually weaken your overall system. They can become a crutch, and then it's very hard to actually deal with reality without them. And yeah, you really can't take too much. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Sometimes I think you need to take too much just to know where the line is. And also sometimes, I think sometimes what I see is people taking too many different kinds at once. And that can get very confusing. Like, I would actually, I was doing that for a little bit, and I find that each medicine has its own set of teachings and its own sort of interface, you know? So if you're mixing too many, it just gets really fucking confusing and it can throw your system completely out of balance. And I started working with them in a more disciplined way because that's what happens when you turn 40. You know, you have to get serious about your hallucinogen taking. And so now I just do blocks, you know? Well, not blocks, but like, I don't know, I found it was more useful for me to commit to 1 or 2 medicines max for a few months period and then have a few months off and then switch brands whenever you feel need. Like, if you need to, you know, like that. Or you just stick to 1 or 2. If that's what you like gets you, then just stick with that. So that's kind of what happens. And there's this yogic saying which says, if you want to create a monster, you just run a lot of power through an unclean system. So what that means is that if you haven't done enough purification and like training, psychedelics are non-selective amplifiers, so they can amplify everything that's good about you, and they can also amplify everything that's fucked about you. Like, a lot of your shadow material can come up as well. If you guys don't know what shadow material is, it's stuff that you don't know about yourself that you probably wish you didn't once you find out about it. It's like, it's basically your demons, you know? So, and this is why a lot of gurus you meet, you know, they're very enlightened on some level, but then they end up abusing women and doing all sorts of fucked up stuff like that. So, and that's what I saw happening as well. A lot of people just not doing enough shadow material work, because I found that each successive level that you sort of get up to will drag more shadow material up to the surface. So it's this constant like cycling back and forth. The other thing I saw was this stuff called backlash. So this is where I think it actually can get a bit dangerous, where people may be taking too much and they weren't ready to face what was dragged up from the depths. And then what happens is that you can actually shut down even more. So I've actually seen people go backwards, where you know, they're having these massive openings, they're doing really great, but they actually don't have the skills or maybe the support group to actually help them work through the deeper trauma that starts coming up. And then in response, they sort of shut down. And yeah, some of them are just really not well right now. There's no real joke to that. But yeah, I mean, I only started understanding this through working with an IFS therapist. I don't know if you guys know about internal family systems therapy, but essentially what that is that there are parts of our psyche called protectors. And this is just, they basically protect the pain that our parts of our inner child exiles are sort of trapped in, you know? And then psychedelics basically override these protectors for a brief period of time so you can access that. But if you don't fully metabolize that stuff, then they come back with a vengeance and you shut down, and then you can have this whole issues of fucking problems which happen. So yeah, and the other thing, and I'm not saying that these are just the traps and pitfalls. I'm not saying psychedelics are crap. They're clearly fucking amazing. I'm just saying that you don't hear about this stuff that much, so this is what this talks about. They can also open up your energetic field a lot, and I found that I went through this whole phase where I couldn't actually live in Sydney for about 4 years because it was just too intense. And I found that a lot of people who I was coming up with in the medicine scene, everyone just left the city at some point. They couldn't handle living in the city. There was too many energies. A lot of them became hermits for a while. I went through about 2 years where I was just living in this fucking trailer in Darwin, which was amazing. I had to do that, but like, because my system was so activated, I actually just had to go somewhere just to settle it down for a while and stop doing stuff. So, okay, we're nearly at the end. Yeah, so the other thing you can do is not taking enough. This sounds very contradictory, but you know, the Sequoians in Ecuador, they actually say one of the biggest causes of sorcery is mid-range doses of ayahuasca. So what I interpret that to mean is that you can actually just amplify your ego without going through the full ego death. And what that happens is that you just end up having a bunch of dickheads who are very ego-driven, and a lot of their sort of shadow material takes over them, and they sort of turn Darth Vader. I've seen that sort of happen with some practitioners. I don't know where they're at now because I had to distance myself from them. So the other thing is that it's not a quick fix. You can get like a lot of ground early on, like the first 30% of your journey comes very easily. It's like low-hanging fruit. But then the further you go on, the harder it gets. You got to do more work. I found that I had to get into the sober healing methods to like get it to the deeper shit. And I would say like I had a lot of ground for the first 2 years, and then after that there was a lot of work involved. And overall, I would say like it's taken me 7 years in total. And you know, not everyone's different, obviously, but like from the first opening, it's taken me about 7 years to actually like feel okay again, to like some higher level of integration where I can actually hang out in Sydney with people and not think that, you know, spirits are trying to attack me and shit. So I was just exaggerating there, but it has happened. But anyway, that's another story. Which brings me to the final part of this talk, which is like what is actually the end point of healing? Like, you know, like where does it end? Because I've noticed, and this is not just in the psychedelic scene, but this is in the fucking whole self-healing scene. Like, you can just get stuck in this endless healing process. You know, you see workshop junkies, people hopping from circle to circle, and it actually stops becoming healing. It just becomes this merry-go-round, this sort of experience chasing. I guess it's some kind of, I call it the healing bypass. And so, and I was on that as well. Like, I'm not judging anyone, but I guess I found an end. Well, not an end point. Like, it never ends, obviously, healing, but I sort of reached this end point maybe last October, which is why I put the book out and was just like, fuck, I just need to do something now. Where I essentially, I just realized, actually, I'm okay now. I just need to be in the world and like participate and try and contribute. So I think it's good. It's a good idea for you to have some kind of, I wouldn't say a goal, but just some kind of marker for when you're going to be okay, to not like make healing your main focus. And for me, I guess it was trying to be in a functional relationship where my attachment wounds weren't activating all the time, and where I could actually fulfill my life's work in the real world without being interfered by my fucking self-sabotaging demons and shit. So I reached that point. So yeah, I guess that's the end of the talk. So thank you. Oh, I was going to read an excerpt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that all right?
Half an hour, so.
Oh, another half an hour.
Yeah.
I was talking very fast, wasn't I? Yeah, I'm kind of nervous, and I had this huge cup of cacao. So I was like, this will open my heart. And then I was like, no, I sound like a speed freak. So I'm just going to read an excerpt from the book. So this is like, this is about my first ayahuasca experience. So the first few chapters about me being depressed. I wouldn't say I was suicidal, but I wrote a lot of suicide jokes, which weren't funny. So that was kind of my level of depression. And then I find ayahuasca, so this is me drinking ayahuasca for the first time. Shit, not enough. I hated this feeling. It underpinned the entire economic system that I was enmeshed in. It was almost worse than having too much, which was another feeling that underpinned the entire economic system that I was enmeshed in. Actually, it was a combination of having too much while feeling like I didn't have enough that underpinned the entire economic system that I was enmeshed in. That's why I was here, sitting with a bucket in front of me, in a darkened room decorated with flower petals, scented candles, and crystals, waiting for the first cup of ayahuasca to take effect. New age music that sounded like Enya giving birth to a litter of elves played over me. I paid my money, I bought my ticket, I wanted my healing now. $200 for instant spiritual enlightenment was a good deal. I sat there sweating in the darkness, searching for a discernible shift in consciousness. Some of the other people around me were already going under. The group consisted of mostly crystal-clad, middle-aged Caucasian women with bodies lean and taut from holding yoga poses for an inordinate length of time. I could hear them sighing, moaning, and breathing heavily like they were having orgasms with their dream lovers. It was vaguely distressing. These people sounded like they were in touch with their feelings. Like any healthy modern male, the only feelings I was in touch with was anger and rage, apathy and indifference. I tapped my fingers impatiently. Without the effects of ayahuasca, I was just lying in some Airbnb house in the Byron Bay hinterland, listening to sickeningly earnest, new age white people chant Vedic mantras over shitty techno. Not my idea of a good time. What seemed like a couple hours passed before Warm Eyes, the facilitator, softly announced he'd be serving the second cup. I lined up. Can I grab a big cup, I asked. I need to lodge some formal complaints with God tonight. Warm Eyes nodded and filled the cup to the brim. He was a generous man. I drank it down in one motion and returned to my seat. Why do you want to drink ayahuasca? Warm Eyes had inquired in his pre-ceremony interview with me. Warm Eyes was a kind-hearted, goateed Italian who'd been a barista in a previous life. Now instead of brewing coffee, he was brewing ayahuasca. I want to know how I can be a better comedian, I told him. Also, I can't stop thinking about dying all the time. Warm Eyes nodded. Also, my life is meaningless. I'm like a rudderless boat floating on a sea of loveless wanks. Warm Eyes nodded again. Also, I'm looking for some character growth to bore people to death with in the book I keep telling everyone I'm writing. He nodded once more. Also, there's a little man inside my head who's always trying to kill me. I would like to kill him first. Warm Eyes yawned. Do you think the medicine can help me? For sure, although the medicine gives you what you need, not what you want. And sometimes what you think you need isn't what you need, in fact, quite the opposite, Warm Eyes told me, smiling wryly. Also, keep in mind, once you open this door, there's no going back. You cannot close the door. You cannot go back to the way you were before. I nodded. Also, the medicine might give you some answers, but often it just raises more questions. I nodded again. Also, you may have to face everything you've been running from your entire life. I nodded once more. Also, sometimes people shit themselves. So make sure you bring some spare underwear. I made a mental note to bring some spare underwear. Warm eyes, portentous words echoed in my mind as I lay in wait, clutching onto my spare underwear for security. My body began to buzz as a pleasant wave of energy ran up and down my body. The first thing I noticed was a song being sung from far away. It was the sound of an old man's voice and a soft leaf rattle shaking. I had no idea what he was singing about, but it sounded impossibly old, emanating directly from nature like the wind or the rain. I tried to work out if it was Warm Eye's voice, but I couldn't tell. My senses were suddenly too skewed. A wave of pictures resembling a high-speed flicker book of unrelated cave paintings flashed before my eyes. I couldn't quite discern the individual pictures, they were simply moving too fast. Then I began to hear hundreds of whispering voices. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but they seemed to be full of information in a different language. A shadowy old woman appeared to my right and came up to me, looking me up and down. At first I thought it was OCD, Warm Eye's New Age control freak partner, but as I tried to make out her face, she evaporated right in front of me. Was this a famed ayahuasca spirit people spoke of meeting whilst on medicine? I felt a feminine presence scan over and through my body. Whatever it was, it felt as though it had its own sentient intelligence. All your energy is going towards your head. You Westerners exist in this world like floating heads attached to nothing. You need to pull your energy back down to be evenly redistributed to the rest of your body, it informed me. How do I do that, I asked. Stop drinking coffee, stop taking all that dexedrine, no more stimulants, stop taking any kind of chemical drugs, it's unbalancing your mind. Blah, 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 there's sort of life coach stuff there. Why do you speak like a life coach? It's a bit off-putting, I said to her, but there was no reply. I then watched a growing web of neon lights appear in the center of my field of vision and begin to form a slowly spinning globe. It was Earth. Help me, Earth cried. What? I said. Help me, Earth said again. No thanks, I'm quite all right. Help me, Earth said once more. Okay, I finally relented, hoping that Earth would stop harassing me. But then again, I was standing on her face at the time. Help me, Earth repeated again. How? Help me, Earth repeated once more. Geez, Earth isn't much of a conversationalist, I thought. Listen, Earth, I've been recycling for years now. Isn't that enough? Every Wednesday I take out all the cans and put them in a separate bin. Then I take all the glass items and put them in a different bin. Finally, I put the cardboard and paper goods in a separate bin. Sometimes it takes me up to 15 minutes to do it, but every week I still do it unless I'm hungover and can't be bothered. Well, okay, some weeks I forget to do it. But to be quite honest, after all these years of occasional recycling, I haven't noticed much of a difference in the state of the world. It's a bit discouraging to go to all that effort and not see any changes. Sometimes I ask myself why I still do such seemingly futile actions. Is it just to help my tortured conscience sleep at night while greater evils take place around me all the time? But then I realize, no, I do this because I sincerely want to make the world a better place, as long as it doesn't take too much time and effort and doesn't inconvenience me or compromise my living standard in any way. Help me, Earth said one final time before falling silent. Eventually the ayahuasca wore off, but the sense of sacredness remained, sheathing the world around me in a magical silken sheen. It was the kind of feeling that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, the kind of feeling that my ancestors would have felt all those millennia ago, back when they were all circle jerking around firelit cave paintings because they didn't have the internet, the disgusting primitive savages. I wandered about in the moonlight, savoring the afterglow and stroking my chin whiskers, trying to look as profound as possible to all the people who weren't watching me. All those years of doing drugs in clubs, and I'd been doing them wrong. This wasn't like some random tab of acid at a music festival or snorting a crushed up pill in a club toilet. This was a sacred medicine done with a healing intention in a ritual ceremonial setting. I'd been chasing something during all those lost years, but at the time I hadn't known what it was. This was it. Still, I doubted the visions. Talking to Earth, was I out of my mind? I was a scientific materialist, a nihilist. Everything meant nothing to me, so why not just get fucked up and then kill yourself? All my heroes had died of shotgun blasts to the face with needles full of heroin hanging out of their arms, thought leaders to the very end. They'd had everything, so they killed themselves. It was the only next logical career move they could make. Now I was seeing visions of Mother Earth trying to get me to do things for her. Was I going to have to recycle even more often now? Wasn't 3 times a year enough? What more did this fucking blood-sucking planet want from me? My eyes narrowed with suspicion. Whatever this business was, it stunk of deep hippie with a double serving of woo-woo. The little man inside my head who was always trying to kill me crawled out of the folds of my cerebral cortex, coughing and spluttering. Ayahuasca vomit staining the front of his shirt. He looked afraid. No more ayahuasca. Please, I know I'm always trying to kill you all the time, but this kind of death is not my idea of fun. Please, I beg you, don't go any further down this path. I don't want to, homunculus, and yet I feel like I must. Why? Well, I'm trying to write a book to justify my existence, and there has to be some character growth in it, otherwise it'll be really fucking boring and no one will want to read it. And I was reading this guy, Joseph Campbell, who analyzed world mythology and found this underlying common narrative that ran through all these myths. He called it the hero's journey, and in it, every character has to go through these trials and tribulations in order to find out who he is and his place in the world. So, oh please, you're going to risk death or insanity so you can crawl up your own arsehole in a narcissistic voyage of masturbatory self-discovery while the real physical world burns to the ground, just because some patriarchal white supremacist academic pushed his Anglo-centric individualist worshipping narrative propaganda in your soft directionless head? What are you, 5 years old? Emotionally, I'm about 4 years old, but I'm working on it. Why can't you just live your own story instead of forcing some white supremacist self-absorbed narrative puffery into your own? And besides, what happened to the communal journey? Why does it always have to be about one lone idiot and his egoic quest for blah, blah, blah? I guess you have a good point there. And you know, I'd always suspected Joseph Campbell was a white supremacist in private, but my suspicions have been now confirmed by unsubstantiated mudslinging. Exactly. You don't need to change. Why rock the sinking boat? Character growth is a new age conspiracy designed to sell you self-help books and online courses you never finish. Why risk what little you have now for the future unknown? You make a good point there, little man inside my head who is always trying to kill me. I guess I don't really want to change. Sure, my life sucks right now, but it's comforting in the predictability of how it sucks. I guess that's why people stay in abusive relationships for so long, right? The blows still sting, but at least it's reassuring to know that it's the same person hitting you all the time because they love you, right? The little man inside my head who was always trying to kill me all the time was right. No more ayahuasca for me. It was too much effort to change. It was best to stay the way that I was until the way that I was killed me. And then I drink ayahuasca in the next chapter again. So, thank you. So, I will warn you, like, the book itself is kind of dark. Like, my sense of humor is still fucked up. So, like, if you're easily offended, you're probably not going to like it. So, but I wanted kind of that take, you know? So my background is sort of the Gen X fucking cynical Sydney warehouse people. So, you know, I figure it's a refreshing take because usually you get sort of the you know those people. So you've been a lovely crowd. So we're going to have a little break. If you want to buy books, great. Yeah, we'll do a Q&A in a minute. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. So we'll just dive into a Q&A and whatever questions you have. Mark here with the microphone, you'll stick your hand up, we can find you, just so that it's all mic'd up and we can record. Well, I made a ton of notes about different things that you spoke of. I mean, there's a lot to go off there. I guess one thing that we hear a lot about is integration.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that mean to you? Because it seems to be a different thing to everybody.
Yeah.
You've got sort of very structured levels of it. Some people seem to think it's only necessary when there's a bad reaction. But do you want to speak a bit to integration to start us off?
I think it's really different for everyone's process, especially, but I was reading like, we have different operating systems. Like some people are very visual, other people are very verbal, other people are very kinesthetic and feeling wise. And you actually need to use systems that you're not actually used to using apparently to more effectively integrate psychedelics. And I found this to be true for me because I'm a very intellectual sort of trapped in the mind type guy usually. And the best way that I found integrating was actually microdosing and doing a lot of movement, which is why I had to do a lot of Qigong. So actually I was doing a lot of Qigong and microdosing very small doses, and I found that really effective. I was actually running microdosing movement day clinics for some of the people who were sitting with me, and people who had very difficult trips were actually able to fully integrate them more effectively because a lot of this stuff is actually happening on a very unconscious level, and I feel that a lot of that unconscious imprints are actually carried in the body. And there are a lot of energetic blockages which can also happen, which aren't fully resolved sometimes at the end of a weekend, and they can actually be worked through this physical movement level. But everyone's different, and sometimes my friend was telling me actually he was drinking medicine in Canada, and what they do is that you do medicine and then they just leave you in the woods for like 5 days with like some food and water, and you just sit with yourself for like 4 days. And he said that was just incredible. Like, obviously, it probably sounds a bit unsafe. But he said it was really good because he didn't have to go back to his life. I think a big problem is like integration is a communal experience. And for me, what I found hard was I was a comedian, so comedians are not really into healing, most of them. And so I was having these fucking crazy experiences, and then I'd go back being, yeah, I talked to Mother Earth, and everyone just thought I was cracked. And I hear this happening to a lot. People have huge experiences, and then they go back to their office job. Everyone's like, how was your weekend? And they're like, well, I had a demon pulled out of my stomach, and now I don't hate my dad. And they're like, oh, okay, this guy's fucked. You know, he's off chops. So actually, you need to find other people who have been through the experiences you've been through, so you can collaborate and basically not feel so crazy. Because this goes into, in the book, there's like 3 stages of initiatory experience. The first phase is like where you're going into the liminal state. And then the second stage is the actual initiation experience. And then the third stage is reintegration back into the community, where you get given, you know, your new self. And a big problem with my integration was I felt I was birthing through a new version of myself, but then I'd go back to my regular life and everyone just knew me as old depressed Nick. And it was actually quite jarring because I was like, let me be who I am now, except, you know, that's why I had to kind of leave Sydney for a few years, you know, I had to leave the ghosts that I was. So I think that's another big part of integration. Yeah, so I think just finding the others and building a good community. But I think sometimes what I see in the integration, people just talk about it too much. You know, it becomes too intellectual and becomes a big intellectualized sort of exercise. And I feel that's why I found, for me at least, the physical grounding in the body stuff was far more effective, because a lot of it's not verbal. It's too beyond words to actually verbalize. And so sometimes you just, and also what I was doing was just going into nature. I was spending long times, I had no choice really because I didn't really live anywhere. I was just living in the woods for a while. And that was very helpful because I was just able to sort of let the system settle. Yeah. What else? I think that's kind of the main brunt of what I found with integration. Yeah, but yeah, what I was talking about before, they were saying like if you're actually not a very verbal person and you're more a feeling person, it might be more useful for you than to try and journal about it, you know? But I found also sometimes people were journaling too much at the beginning of the experience, and that can actually choke what's still unfolding in you. So I found actually just taking dot points, not trying to build a big narrative about it, like writing a book about it, for example, was quite useful. Yeah, you got to leave it space for it to keep developing, because like, for example, Iboga, the integration period is about 3 years. So it keeps going for about 3 months after your experience. So the last thing you want to do is just go, okay, yep, done the Iboga, because it just keeps happening. So yeah, that's about it, yeah, for the integration.
Stick your hand up and make a noise.
You're talking about movement and then microdosing during the movement.
Yeah.
What are you microdosing?
You a cop? I was microdosing. Mushrooms is very useful. Microdosing mushrooms was very useful for movement assisted stuff. Ayahuasca, I was microdosing ayahuasca. Obviously, I was making it, so you know, you could do that. I found with Iboga microdosing, that was some kinds of movement was good for Iboga, but Iboga can be quite stimulating, so it wasn't very good for the slow movement. And I found actually the very slow motion, mindful movement really helped a lot. But Iboga microdosing was, yeah, that's very useful for other things as well. For therapy, for example, I found it really assisted the therapeutic process. If you've ever tried ranges of therapy, it can get past defense mechanisms that you wouldn't normally be able to get. Like, for example, I'd always fall asleep during IFS sessions with my therapist, but if I took a little bit of Iboga, I could keep going. Yeah. So mushrooms and I reckon are best for movement stuff. Yeah.
Just a quick question on the Iboga thing. Have you come across a phenomenon where people start microdosing Iboga and they can get really angry?
Yes, I have found that. Well, basically, Iboga microdosing is actually very complex. So if anyone has bought the Mani drops off me, just look up Iboga microdosing root bark guidelines by Nick Sun, and that'll give you the full write-up, because basically what happens, mushrooms and even cactus, all those microdosings are pretty, you get a pretty set effect. You know, it's pretty predictable. Okay, I'm gonna feel this for this amount of hours. Iboga is like, he will bring up your shit eventually. So you'll get early gains where you just feel very mindful and very present and you can see what's going on. But then if you keep pushing it, because what happens with microdosing culture, people just tend to just take it all the time then. They're like, okay, I'm just gonna take this every day. But with Iboga, you can't do that because it actually builds up in your system. It lasts in your liver for 3 months and keeps leaching out noribogaine. And so if you keep stacking, it actually, you just end up in this pretty triggered state a lot of the time because he will bring up everything that triggers you in your life for you to face, which is why I like him so much because it's very hard to bypass on Iboga. So if you keep going, so if you are getting into that state, you actually have to pull back for a while and just stop doing it. But people don't do that. They just think, I'll just keep taking this because then I'll keep getting better. And then it starts you biting them on the ass and they're like, oh, I don't get it. I just yelled at my girlfriend a lot this week. And I'm like, yo, this, you gotta take like a month off, 2 weeks, a month off sometimes if that starts happening. Or less regular. Some people say 2 days on, once a week, that sort of thing. Yeah. Yep.
I'm just wondering what you think about the future for psychedelics now that things are opening up a bit more and we seem to be heading to a medical model or a retreat model or a recreational model. Like, what?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I like the idea of the synthetic, the syncretic approach, you know, where they've got the doctors and the psychologists and then the shamans, they're all working together in one retreat facility. I like what they're doing with that. I would love to actually go see what that's like. But I'm a bit cynical about the corporate model, obviously. Like, I don't know, I just, you know, when they're making all the psilocybin analogs and stuff like that. So I feel like what they're trying to do is come up with a psychedelic that's kind of like psychedelics, but doesn't actually have the magic and the spiritual component, which is a huge part of the healing. And then you'll kind of get this weird Brave New World type version of the medicine, which will kind of help some people, but not really be the real thing, which might help like people who ordinarily wouldn't want to go sit in a circle with a shaman or something like that. So I think there'll be cleavage lines. There'll be people who are in the clinical model, and then I think the underground's too big in Australia to really stop unless they go on a full hardcore crackdown. Because the thing with Australia, you can actually grow most of the plants here, which you can't do in the rest of the world. So, I mean, the gardens I've seen in Australia, I was just like, what the fuck? Like, I won't mention any names here. But you know, the biggest ayahuasca vine I saw in my life is in Rudy Hill. So it's like this thick. So there's some people growing some weird shit here. There's a fucking Iboga plantation in Cairns that I was just like, what is this doing here? So like with 300 plants and like there was like about, I don't know, an ayahuasca vines that were like a whole forest like from here to the end of the room. So I don't think they can, and also I was on the psilocybin forums and stuff like that. And the amount of people just posting when sub-season is on, just going, hey, look what I found in my backyard. Like that's everywhere now. So it's clearly like you can't stop them. They're infiltrating. So I think that's, you're gonna have the official model and then you're just gonna have the underground model that's just gonna become more and more, because I really don't think it's in their best interest to actually legalize these psychedelics, because if enough people take them, everyone's gonna be like, hey, what the fuck's going on? Like this is fucked. So I don't know how they're gonna really legalize something that's gonna destroy the very system that's trying to, you know, co-opt them. So that's where I stand on that. Yeah. Yep.
You touched a little on IFS theory
Yep.
and the use of psychedelics. What other frameworks, if any, have you found to also, or if you have found to also be beneficial, maybe alongside IFS or?
Yeah, I mean, I felt, you know, I stumbled into IFS because I had one of my Iboga journeys was exactly like an IFS experience. And then I heard about IFS and I was reading it and I was like, holy shit, that's exactly what I was doing, like doing basically soul retrieval, sort of child exile stuff. The other models I found actually were like the yogic models, like all the tantric yoga stuff and the Taoist models I was following about the process of how they would usually train the body, the nervous system up, and how I realized that we were doing it in the reverse order. Like in the East, you'd spend I was reading about like, you'd spend 15, 20 years doing these practices like purifying the mind body system, and then you'd get the empowerment from the guru or do some kind of tantric ritual. But and so I was able to then work backwards after I blew my higher centers too much, and I was having all sorts of crazy shit happening. So I found the tantric model very useful for me at least, and also the Taoist model, but they're all kind of related. Jungian psychology was very useful. A lot of that stuff, like his red book. I don't know if anyone's read a bit of his red book. It's like pretty cooked. It's like pretty much like on a burger trip. That stuff was really useful. The stuff which goes into shadow material is really important as well. And what else? I don't know. Like the last year, I just tried everything because I had 20 grand in a sock from all the ayahuasca stuff I was running, and I was like, well, I can't put this in the bank, so I just went on this sort of healing binge. So I tried Vision Quest. That was amazing. That taught me that I didn't need to take anything to get to a similar place. Like I just felt like I was, I got to a very deep place on Vision Quest. Actually, what was very healing was being in a functional relationship for the first time in my life. And then doing MDMA therapy to get over my attachment wounds. That was very useful. Tantra retreats that got rid of my body shame just by showing my cock to everyone. Very good. I'll show my cock to you all if you want. So I have no fear about that. So that was really important, actually doing those 2 Tantra retreats. Sorry?
Family show.
Oh yeah, sorry. Oh yeah, whoops, sorry kids. No, that was, actually the Tantric retreats were really incredible because like, we did this one ritual where all the women were dressed in white and all the men were in the center. And they did this full eye gaze ritual, and we didn't take any medicine, but like I went into a full ayahuasca space where all these women were turning into like feminine archetypes, and I was actually able to like forgive wrongs that had been committed against me by my mother, perceived wrongs. And I went into this full archetypal space looking at each of these. They all became women from my life, and I was able to have very profound like soul conversations with them that I wouldn't be able to have with the actual person. So that was really incredible. I did martial arts as well. Like I did Muay Thai in Thailand, which was, I just think every dude should do that because like I had a lot of fear, and I was teased a lot as a kid. And there's some things which the plants just can't heal because a lot of it's actually relational healing that you need to do. And plant healing a lot of the time, I mean not always because you're in a circle so you're interacting with other people, but a lot of times it's just you and you're on the plants and you're going into yourself, but actually a lot of this stuff can only be sorted out with some other person. So that's why I found that was quite useful. And just the Qigong stuff was really important. And the psychotherapy, I guess. What else? Yeah, fasting. Fasting was really good as well. Yeah, that just stopping everything. That was very useful. Especially if anyone's spinning out really badly. I had this process happen to me, which actually wasn't from any plants at all. It was just from I don't know what it was. It was just some kind of spontaneous soul descent thing. And I went into pretty much like a weird sort of I also had a microbiome issue with like a lot of Candida stuff. So I was pretty much like, I was not very well. And so I ended up having to do like a 14-day fast, and that completely reset my mental health. So that was actually a very useful tool if anyone ever does too much and starts feeling a bit crazy.
So when you took 14-day fast, so nothing but just water, or?
Yeah, I didn't want to do it, but I just tried everything else. But that's just what I talked to one of my friends in the scene who's probably done more medicine than anyone I've ever met and is still like highly functional. And I'm like, I don't understand how this guy still walks the earth without fucking exploding in a cloud of confetti. Like Julian Palmer, if anyone's met him, he's a bit of a unit. But he was like going, it's a long fast. So he does like month-long fasts every year. And I researched that, and they were talking about people with schizophrenia and clinical depression. They would have fasting hospitals, and that would pretty much completely reset their brain chemistry and also their microbiome, which is actually a cause for a lot of issues, mental issues. So I went through that because nothing else had worked, and that was that was a real game changer. Yeah. Yep.
How do you see the underground scene changing in the last few years, if at all?
Oh man, everyone's doing it now. Like, I don't know. I used to know everyone who was doing it in Sydney. Now I have no idea who the fuck's doing it. Like, everyone's doing it. So, yeah, I feel like it's getting to, like, when there was that death last year, I think that's when, like, I feel like the golden days are over. We could kind of just get away with going under the radar. But I honestly feel that as it gets more and more popular, we're going to hear, unfortunately, some of these stories. Because I just keep hearing more and more stories of some pretty fucked up stuff happening, and all sorts of abuses of power and stuff like that. Yeah, so I feel like, I don't know if it's ever going to self-police itself, but I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if there's going to be a today, tonight crackdown story or something like that. Which is kind of why I'm thinking maybe where everyone's kind of like learning enough by themselves to kind of do it with themselves and their friend group. I think that's probably like the safest model in some ways. If you can actually educate yourself and also, go see experienced people for like support and knowledge. If, find the elders in the scene or people who have some experience, but then also just trying to work within groups of known people where you already have trusting relationships with each other. I think that's actually probably the best way to go. And yeah, I think word of mouth spreads about who's good and who's bad. It gets pretty fast. But the only problem is that I've heard people saying, yeah, he's really bad, but I'm still going to go because I don't know who else to go to. So yeah, I think it's still forming. So I think we're going to see where it falls over the next 5 years. But I think just yeah, I guess that's it. Yeah. Yep.
Talk about Manny?
Oh, Manny Eye. Yeah, Manny Eye. I was selling this tincture there because it's gray area legal. But it's apparently like a female form. I mean, I don't believe the plants have genders. I think they're just energetic spirits, and they come into our systems, and then our human interpretive systems classify them as genders. And also, I feel like our earliest imprints are actually mother, father, grandfather, grandmother. And that's why they appear to us as mother, father, little children, all that sort of stuff. They're actually none of these things. They just activate the deepest imprints on our unconscious. I mean, iboga is so variable in its effects. It's hard for me to really say exactly what it does. Like, all I can say is it seems to balance out your imbalances to a point. Unless you start abusing it or not mindful about you use it, then they start teaching you. It's a strict teacher. So these medicines, I guess if I'm to compare, like, generalize Manny Eye versus like Tabananthi Boga, like Iboga, Manny Eye for me gives me a sense of stillness versus like movement. Like with the male Iboga, I just get shit done. There's no procrastination. I can be sometimes too yang. Like, I found myself getting into arguments, which was actually kind of nice because sometimes I'm not that assertive. But with Manny, I found I was more meditative, and I could meditate for ages. It was like the default mode network was completely turned off. And so I haven't done a full dose of that, basically because, yeah, it's a terrifying medicine. So I've done it 4 times, and the last time was like, I need to like fully integrate that before I go back into that space. So yeah, so all I could say is that during COVID, it became available through a certain channel, and there's hardly any information about it on the internet, except the Bwiti high priests apparently said, we really didn't want to sell this, but we were really desperate because things were really bad monetarily for us. So it's only meant for the high priests, but evidently, I think the medicine's trying to move out to us, or at least that's how I justify selling it to you. Really just shot myself in the foot. Maybe just edit this bit out. So yeah, I mean, I've microdosed it with a lot, and yeah, I would say it's very similar to iboga. It's just less masculine and tends to be softer. It's actually a bit similar to mushrooms. But again, if you take too much of it, like I said before, it will start bringing up the stuff that you need to face. Yeah. Anything else? Yep.
What's your approach to the future for psychedelics with all that you know? Have you sort of decided, well, maybe twice a year, or like, are you going to keep tripping? On what and how often? If it's not a personal question.
No. I've thought about this a lot. I took after that book was written, I took 10 months off. Like I was like, I need to go sit for a while and think about stuff. And I just got back to regular life, which was very useful. And then I was serving ayahuasca for 3 years, but I wasn't taking it as much. Like this was written during 2018, and that's when one of my friends who, he was like, yeah, I just drank it every week for a year, and that was my self-initiation process. So I thought, oh, okay, I'll do that. And yeah, now that I know that people in the scene, and myself included, will give advice to people, and actually you got to work it out yourself because everyone's different, and some of these people are actually fully on the spectrum. Like they can handle this shit, and that actually might not work for you. So for me now, I'm just not tripping that much. I did some MDMA therapy to try and work through the attachment wound, but I really try and pick my battles. Like I have to be like, actually, do I really need to do this right now? And what I found very effective is that I'll try and bookend it with sober work. So the last trip I had before the MDMA was like last year. I did like a Qigong course, and then I did peyote 2 days after, and that was really profound. So I try and do a block of sober work and then maximize it, and then I just sit with that. So, and then occasionally I'll do a microdose if I feel like I need to. But I'm trying to just suffer this dimension straight, which isn't very fun sometimes. But I'm coming up with good comedy now, so. So yeah, but basically, yeah, the plants told me, all right, just get back to the earth now and try and, be in both worlds. So yeah, so that's where I'm at now. Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of this stuff seems to be like quite individual. Take medicine, go on a journey, and try to figure stuff out
Yep.
yourself. Like my sessions with a psychologist spent 2-3 sessions that really check and challenge what you're actually traumatized about. So I'm wondering, how does that work when you're trying to go on a journey by yourself?
Yeah.
You're not quite aware of what's really triggering you or not.
Oh, what do you mean? Like when you're not aware of what your trauma is?
Yeah, so I came in with one thing, and then 3 seconds later, the psychologist.
Oh, it's a different thing.
Says, oh, actually, it's this.
Yeah.
I need someone to get me to that point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we all have our conscious ideas of what's going on, but I mean, the plants kind of just go to a much deeper level and take away all your conscious defenses. And sometimes the intellectualization of what you think's going on is actually just a big defense thing. So the plants seem to just completely. And also, I find that the therapies can be very intellectual sometimes, but the plants can go very much deep into the body where all our trauma is carried. And then you'll have a resulting psychological experience that sort of parallels that. So that's how I find the plants sort of help. And also, I'd rather listen to a plant spirit than, a human. They make the best bosses. So, anyone else?
Yeah, I think it's really good. One thing that you focused on this afternoon that I haven't heard a lot of people speak to directly is the notion of psychedelics affecting the central nervous system.
Yeah.
More so than anything, we too often tend to prioritise what it's doing to the mind.
Yeah.
But it really is the central nervous system that we're
fully
talking about, because that also has so much to do with your mind as well. And yeah, it's sort of like what you're saying. It's like a amplification of the deepest parts of your mind as well. So it kind of feels like it knows you, but it is you because it's an amplification of all your internal thoughts. So
yeah.
So it's slightly off topic, but to go back to that, I think the more you suggested before, people getting into small groups and just approaching this on their own with more agency that's not given to a figure that's taking a lot of money for it and that sort of thing, and get a little bit culty. What would you have to offer in terms of just practical steps? Like a lot of people just don't know where to start. Do they do it outside? Do they do it indoors?
I don't know. I'm toying with trying to write a self guide with just tips. I don't want to because I don't want to say this is how you do it, because then there's a lot of people who do that and everyone's different, But I would say what would I say? I would say just make sure you have friends who you really trust. You don't have to go super deep on the first journey. It helps to have someone who's sober just to hold the ground just in case something does happen. I would say like if you start going, and this comes back to your somatic thing, like the amount of times I saw people, this is where I started researching all the body trauma stuff, is because on every medicine you're getting people shaking a lot, doing all sorts of crazy movements. And yeah, the more, and talking back to your stuff about which psychotherapeutic model, the somatic therapy was very good, and tremor release. Like with Iboga, we were having people with deep trauma just shaking for 24 hours. And so I would say that if you start going into a difficult experience, actually trying to work it out through the body is very useful, because a lot of the time it's just trapped energy, and then we're just lying there just suffering, but it's actually an energetic thing, and you need to just get up and move and dance and try and move it around. I would also just say find a place where if someone starts screaming a lot, no one's going to call the police. That's very important. I'm not saying it's going to happen every time, but you know, if you do it enough times, eventually someone's gonna have that experience. But well, I don't know. But and also, yeah, just go slowly. Like, there's no need to get to infinity straight away. Like, you can just go incrementally. But again, it's like every plant seems to have like a dose level, which is like light, medium, therapeutic, and then ego, death, spiritual. So you got to work out what your intention is. You know, are you trying to heal something, or are you trying to find God or whatever? And yeah, if you're going into the ego death state, it does help, I believe, just to have you know, a guide of some kind. Actually, that'd be really good if you could just hire an experienced dude just to like hold space for you and your crew, like a trip sitter sort of guide, give you a few tips, and then you know, once you get a few sort of journeys under belt, you sort of then take it into your own hands. But I think actually, yeah, I think someone needs to write a book about just what to expect, what terrain to expect, what things you can do if this happens. And there's also simple shit, like Cole told me this trick. Sometimes it's just low blood sugar. And so you just give someone coconut water, and all of a sudden it's okay, they're fine. They're not actually suffering anymore. Cold water. Rape is actually very useful. If you ever have the Amazonian tobacco snuff, that's pulled some people out of some very heavy stuck processes with ire and mushrooms a number of times. That's very useful to have a bit of tobacco on hand. And yeah. I think that's all I can really think of right now. No, that can go either way. It depends on the person. But yeah, that can really flip. I've had people, actually, some of the worst, well, not worst, but difficult experiences I've seen with people is from heavy cannabis use and then doing ayahuasca or something. Yeah, because I don't know. I mean, some people are fine, but I've had a couple difficult experiences. Yeah, from cannabis. But it depends on your relationship with cannabis, you know. Yeah. What else?
More questions?
I just want to make it's more a point than a question.
Okay.
But,
oh, this is Sam, by the way. He's the guy who helped edit the book.
Hey, well done.
So give a round of applause to Sam. He was so helpful. Like, I would have still gotten the book done, but it would have been like 5 years from now. So.
well, I just want, and then maybe so that everyone else can appreciate as well, that there's been a lot of focus on the psychedelic side of things with this story.
Yeah.
But I kind of just want to make the point that it's actually just a hell of an adventure as well.
Oh yeah.
You really haven't gone into what it was actually like to pick through the rubble in Nepal. And
Yeah.
work in the chapel, whatever it was.
Yeah.
So I guess I just want everyone to know that there's a lot of different dynamics going on in the story, and it's a hell of a read.
Oh, thanks.
Because of that as well.
Yeah.
Obviously people here are interested in a certain thing, but I actually think the character growth that you go through in the story is real.
Yeah, for
There's
sure.
a lot of good storytelling going on.
Yeah, thank you.
Underneath
Yep.
all of this stuff.
Yeah. Buy the book. No, it's true. Like, and this is the thing. This is another thing. People can like just put too much emphasis on psychedelics, going, all I need to do is psychedelics, and then. But it's true. Like, actually doing just charity work for 5 months and picking up rocks was super healing as well. Like that was actually really important to my process, and I found that like a karmic purification stuff, and it opened my heart. And like I said, like with the hospice work, that was like I was just like, everyone needs to do this like once. It was so fucking real, and I couldn't complain about shit after that. I still do, it's my act, but you know, I check myself. Yeah. Anyone else? Yep.
What are your thoughts on spirits and entities encountered?
Oh, this is a big topic.
There seems to be two types of people when they say, "Oh, it's just the echo of your unconscious."
I don't believe in that. No. No, I've seen some pretty weird shit that I can't explain. So, yeah, I think some of it is definitely like, and I think this is actually discernment. They say one of the big things if you go into the spirit world is discernment. You actually have to work out what is a projection of your mind and what's genuinely a fucking entity, and that took me a long time to work out. And I've followed different therapeutic models, like IFS calls them unattached burdens. Psychotherapy calls them autonomous personality constructs. I was reading Anne Shulgin's report, which was very interesting because she didn't believe in spirits, and what happened to her and her psychiatrist friend had to do an exorcism. One of her patients needed an exorcism. She didn't believe in exorcisms, but she thought, fuck it, I'll hire a priest and maybe this will work, because nothing else it had. The lady had an exorcism in the therapist's house, and she had this spirit come out of her and then run into the house, and then she started reporting entity experiences where she felt nothing but dread, depression. The dog wouldn't come into the house, the dog would bark at shit, and she's like, I'm losing my mind, I don't know what's going on, I don't believe in this shit, please help me. Anne doesn't believe in anything either, and so they treated it purely therapeutically, like shadow material MDMA work once a month for like 6 months, and it went away. But they didn't believe in entities, but it's still their process still worked, you know, so that really made me think. But yeah, then I've had experiences like I was in the middle of outback Australia drinking ayahuasca, and I had an encounter with like an 8-foot tall black male Aboriginal spirit. I was singing this song about the song line of this acacia that I work with, and I've since learned that you're not really meant to sing about certain shit that you haven't given authority to. I didn't know. I was just this fucking dumb, I'm a shaman, you know, kind of guy. I'll sing a song, you know, I'm a rock star. And and then this dude this black, 8-foot tall black Aboriginal spirit just leaned over my thing and just went, you shouldn't be singing about this boy. And I was just like, whoa, fuck. And I stopped and I freaked out and I apologized. I gave some tobacco in the fire. And he's like, yeah, that's all right. Just don't fucking say that shit. And then about 3 weeks later, I was giving ayahuasca to a guy who'd done a lot of work with indigenous people. And I told him about the story. He said, oh yeah, that class of spirits are called the tall ones. I said, what? And he goes, yeah, they're an actual class of spirits known to that region, and their whole job is to pull you into line. If you step out of lore, then you get told off. And I was like, that's exactly what happened to me. So I didn't have any knowledge of that, but that happened to me. So I thought that was very interesting. So it also depends on what kind of spirit you're dealing with. Like those are land spirits, and then you get weird astral entities. Yeah, very malevolent. In the book, I go through it where I have this spirit taken out of me, and I'm still trying to work out what happened. You know, so yeah, so I think some stuff is a reflection of the mind, but some stuff's definitely, I don't know. I do feel like there is some fucking weird shit out there, and I've just encountered too many weird things and heard too many strange stories. Not even to do with medicine. Like I was living in Darwin for like 5 years, and the amount of stories I've heard from indigenous people there about stuff which happens there with like the little hairy people and stuff like that, and even from white people who work with them, is very like, this is the thing, the Western paradigm does not actually, it's not able to fully, it's too small to actually encompass what gets opened up by the plants. It's great for some stuff, but it's actually not, it's limited in that sort of, but I get why it's useful because it actually cuts out that paradigm completely, and sometimes that just makes life easier. But yeah, I mean, does that answer your question, or? Yeah, okay. I could talk about that stuff for ages. I was pretty obsessed with it for a while. Yeah, I got a whole book on exorcism.
Yeah, I guess it goes to whether we're learning anything new from psychedelics, or if it's just existing information rearranged.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's new old information, but I think it's old information that we've forgotten as this culture that's now being reinterpreted and reintegrated into this existing culture, which is like a new paradigm. So I think it's a bit of both, you know. And I think we're still in very early days. It's going to just get kind of weirder. Yeah.
Because you were talking a bit before about rites of passage.
Yeah.
And given that we have such a lack of it in our culture,
yeah.
What do you see that looking like?
I think it's this self-organizing thing where it's just happening anyway. Because, you know, I haven't been through any traditional rites, but I think that if you're going to go through them, you're meant to just go through them like in the bioregion with the indigenous culture you grew up with. But we're not indigenous people anymore. So I think it's going to have to be this self-initiatory process. So I think that'll hopefully arise in like a organic way to meet the needs. And we'll just sort of, I don't know, I feel like it'll be like the self where you're just doing it with you and your friends and stuff like that, and maybe there'll be some rough guidelines. I don't know. Actually, you know what the best way to do it? If you really want to do that, you just go to a really powerful place by yourself, and you just do medicine by yourself, and you'll receive some kind of information. And that's what I've done a number of times in the book, and that's what my most profoundest. And actually, I was talking to this indigenous shaman up in the Daintree, and he was saying his line of teaching was broken. Like there was no more lineage left, but everyone was being initiated by the land. So if you were meant to do that line of work, you would get spontaneous initiation from the spirits of the land if you were in certain places at certain times. So I think if you're meant to go through that, you'll find what you're looking for. Just spend enough time in the woods by yourself and you'll see some weird shit, I guess. Especially if you're doing psychedelics. But yeah, again, you got to check in with someone to make sure you're not just creating stories in your head. Yeah. Yeah.
What where are your powerful places around Sydney?
I think the less colonized the place is, the better. I spent 5 years in Darwin, and it's very untouched land. Like, I mean, it's still fucked with a bit, but not as much as Sydney. Like, I really notice a difference when I'm in Sydney. You know, it's heavily colonized. They still sing the land up there, so it's still, the energy lines are still intact. So yeah, but yeah, basically, you don't want it anywhere where there's many people. Yeah, you got to go somewhere, and look, if you just talk to the land, and if you have a relationship with the land already, that really helps. Like if you build connection, I mean, everyone has their own way, but I would give offerings and stuff like that, and just develop a communication with the land. The land speaks to you basically. Cactus is very useful for like assisting you in communicating to nature. I hear Mount Yango is a very powerful initiation place, but you kind of need to get permission as well from some of these places. Like you don't want to just wander in unless you're exceptionally pure-hearted. So I think if you really want that, you've got to just send out a prayer and you'll be guided to the right place if it's your time to do that. Yeah, I think. Yeah. You miss?
Just curious what you have to say about ego death.
Ego death. I think it's a lie. Because it just comes back, sometimes stronger than before, and sometimes it can become a bigger obstacle than before. So I think it's very useful to go through, though. I think everyone needs to go through that because a lot of our illnesses come from our disease self-concepts. So if you actually go through ego death, you can actually shed a lot of your shit and then come back as a new person or a new version of yourself, and then you have a chance to sort of rebuild or recreate something new. But I wouldn't go through ego death if you don't have a strong ego in the first place, and that's when people can kind of go through psychosis or become disassociated or start going into more schizophrenic landscapes. But yeah, I definitely think everyone should go through it a few times in their life. Yeah.
Question. If you had not discovered psychedelics and you were working as a comedian, you were suffering this depression, what do you think would have happened in your life?
I think I would have just died very depressed, and yeah, I would have just been the same way. Yeah, I think I would have just slowly become more and more bitter and depressed and hateful and angry at the world, and yeah, probably would have died of some disease. I wasn't very healthy. Yeah, no, honestly, I was like, yeah, I was just sort of drinking and drugging and.
Pretty funny though.
I was funny, but there's a price, you know? Yeah. Yeah, I guess I was funny. I don't know. But there's different kinds of funny, you know? The best comedians you hear of, you'll never hear of because they're too fucked up to actually become famous, you know, or get well known. No, he's well known,
Yeah.
but he's actually super functional. Yeah, he's very functional
I'm
for.
always impressed that you toured with him. I never forget.
Oh yeah.
I think that's like the only reason I like you.
Ah. But he's actually quite healthy as well. He was drinking a lot of vitamin water and eating a lot of sushi. So, so there is a man in the mythos. Yep.
I was constantly worried for your safety reading this book.
Yeah.
Were you worried?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Like worried in between moments or in the middle of moments?
To be honest, through a lot of it, I was just so blinded by my mission at times that I didn't really give a fuck. But there were certain moments where, definitely, I was like, I think I'm losing my mind, and I think I feel honestly psychotic. And yeah, especially after the last Iboga journey, and spending 2 years in Iboga world, that one was just like, I need a break from this shit, you know? Like, I just need to fucking get a job or something. So, yeah. So that's why I've decided just to go back to comedy. It's comforting. So, in a strange way. Yeah. But, yes.
Do you feel like you've merged the two nicely?
I'm in the process where I'm trying to do that now. Yeah. But I'm still an offensive comedian. I thought that might have changed and I'd be like this uplifting dude. Nah. So I'm high energy. I'm high energy offensive, but I just like that shit. So yeah. So I'm gonna be. But I'm talking to a guy. We might potentially start a podcast and try and like do a funny version of all the healing stuff, healing modality, and a guide to all that sort of stuff. So that's kind of what I'm toying with doing next. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Do you find similarity between psilocybin and ayahuasca?
I find they're like sort of the cousins, you know, they're kind of like, you know, psilocybin is just phosphorated DMT. So, but I find psilocybin more in the head, less in the body for me. And it's more in the respiratory system. I find, you know, you get a lot of yawns and a lot of prana moving through your lungs and stuff. So I feel it's quite good for, or you laugh a lot. But I don't really like mushrooms. I just get anxious. So, but I find the ayahuasca seems to be more grounded in the body with the heavy vine content. Yeah, so yeah, I think they're related. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I guess the question on that then is like, you said that you don't really like mushrooms, but do you think that there's specific plants for specific people, or the ones that you have a really hard time on, are they like trying to teach you something that you're resisting, or do you think that they're just, sometimes that's just not the plant?
Yeah, I think everyone resonates with one or two particular plants at any given time, and that might change. Like you might just reach the end of your tenure with a plant, which has happened to me several times in my life. And then like, I think with mushrooms, what happened is that I used to take them recreationally a lot in my 20s when I was very depressed. And it seems to just pull me back to that state again. And it's like I go backwards. So I don't know if I just, the mushrooms, or or the mushrooms just like, yeah, we know what you did to us in the 20s. So you're locked out from now on, buddy. So, yeah. But yeah, definitely. Yep.
I don't know if you'd be able to speak to this, but obviously people experience different plant medicines differently. Like, so in this case, let's say psilocybin and DMT.
Yep.
There are some people who obviously experience it very visually.
Yep.
And then I've heard of other people experiencing it very kinesthetically. So it's just a feeling.
Yep.
Like really limited to those like visuals, and it's just more of a feeling experience. Is that something that you've come across quite a lot? Have you heard of this, or would you say it comes down to just basically the way that, like similar to your learning style?
No, yeah. Well, I've heard people. Yeah, everyone has a different response, no matter what the medicine is. I don't really get visions. I've never seen ayahuasca as a snake. I don't even get visuals on ayahuasca. It's more feelings and insights. I had one lady who just was sleeping for 8 hours in ayahuasca. I was like, who the hell can sleep through ayahuasca? But she could. She had amazing sleep, and it somehow fixed her issues. And she was like, I'm not triggered by this shit anymore. Yeah, and iboga is the same. Like, people can have highly visual experiences. Other people can just, nothing happens at all. My girlfriend took like 35 grams of bark, and nothing happened really. Well, something happened, but it didn't really. You know, it hits everyone differently depending on where you're at in your growth stage. Definitely, yeah. All right, everyone done with this self-indulgent celebration of me?
Do you have any comedy shows coming up?
I've got one in about 2 hours. So, look, I'm just like rebuilding my clown at the moment, so it's like totally hit and miss. It's very exciting. The psychedelic material is like very hit and miss because I have to explain too much stuff, and it's just not very relatable. It's like, hey, has anyone been to the land of the dead? No one's been to the land of the dead. So it's like, hey, you know when you're, you think someone's died in one of your ceremonies, and then you realize, it's like, it's not very relatable. It's like, hey, have you ever had a fucking spirit pulled out of your fucking stomach, and then, your dead grandfather's like telling you off for masturbating all the time when you're a teenager? It's like not. This doesn't really translate, so I'm thinking of trying to write like a niche show for the plant community, which I might then tour around, and then also just straight stand-up, which I'm more working on. But it's yeah. So I think that's the idea. I might try and do it, but also I'm going to talk to my friend Nikos, who's into animation, and I like the idea of trying to animate the plant world because I think that'd be more. Actually, you could do more of the psychedelic stuff. And that's got me really interested to try and do something like that. So yeah, hopefully, yeah. Thanks so much, guys, for coming out. Thank you.